As an independent music podcast, 101 Part-Time Jobs highly recommends DistroKid as the best solution to putting out your own music online. You can join 1 million other artists from all across the world putting out their own music on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else across the DSPs where people are listening to your music. My dream as a kid was to run a small little label, and now with DistroKid, getting music out online is the easiest it ever has been, making 100% of your own royalties while paying a small annual fee. And that fee's even smaller as a 101 Part-Time Jobs listener. Head to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod to get 30% off your first year putting out your own music on DistroKid. Getting your own music out into the world has never been easier. Head to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod to get the best deal you can. Welcome to 101 Part-Time Jobs. It's the podcast where I speak to bands and musicians about how they make it work today. For today's episode, I spoke with Kara Jackson, who I first heard about last year when her new record, Why Does the Earth Give Us People to Love, was getting rave reviews, and her songwriting, her lyrics, her imagery just really creates a wonderful vision out of not much at all. The production is really slim, bare bones, and these songs really stand out. She really offers her heart to you on a plate, and you feel it. You know, it doesn't feel forced. It feels natural. It feels pure. It feels very real. Kara Jackson's an incredible songwriter. She's also a poet, once a poet laureate, growing up in Chicago, being surrounded by so many different artists and writers who inspired her. So here's Kara Jackson on today's 101 Part-Time Jobs. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, make sure you subscribe. We put out 2 episodes every week with good, interesting, exciting bands and artists. So we'd love for you to be here and stick around. Shout out to our sponsors, 2000 Trees, the brilliant independent festival down in the southwest here in England. It's happening on the 10th to the 13th of July, which is just around the corner now. If you'd like to go, but you still haven't got your ticket, you can get 50 quid off your weekend ticket by heading to 2000trees.co.uk and using the voucher code 101pod. And you get to see bands like the Gaslight Anthem, The Chats, Don Broco, Hot Mulligan, Manchester Orchestra, Gouge Away, Slotface, Angel Dust, The Mysterines. So many excellent bands and artists at 2000 Trees this year. If you want to go but you haven't got your ticket, it's not too late. 2000trees.co.uk, and don't forget, use the voucher code 101pod and get 50 quid off your weekend ticket. Alright, coming up after the jump is Kara Jackson. 101 Part-Time Jobs.
I was an English major. I emphasized in language and literature.
Did you get into it? Did you get into the... Because I feel like there's a few different routes you can go as a student. You know, you can have fun and you can party, or, you know, you can be a bit more studious. I think for me, the perfect one is right in the middle. So you can party and do the reading. Because what other time in your life are you supposed to shove information into your brain?
Yeah, it's so true. You're just there to learn and to also like grow up too. Like, I think it's such a like interesting time in your life, like your early, like, you know, late teens, early 20s, such a weird time. So I feel like it's just intentional opportunity to kind of just figure out who you are outside of like your parents' house, and, you know, meet new people from around the world. So I definitely try to take it, even though I've never been like I don't like structure all the time. Like, I think sometimes I feel like everyone struggles with school and like homework and stuff, but I definitely learned a lot academically, and I met some of like my most important friends, too. So
Right.
that was a big thing for me.
And it was a big year for you. The record came out, Why Does the Earth Give Us People to Love? You were at uni. Your grandfather passed at the start of the year. I hope you don't mind me bringing that up.
Yeah, yeah, he passed last year. Like,
Yeah, so that's a lot to go through. And as a songwriter who, you reflecting and getting those reflections down on paper, did you find you were able to put the time in for yourself and get your thoughts on paper and try and dig down to that most pure place of Kara Jackson?
yeah, I feel like with the album coming out and everything, I didn't really expect to kind of have such a reaction to it and to have a public kind of assessment of it. But in the midst of that and just like personal things going on, I think I'm still learning, even on tour now, I'm still learning how to practice boundaries and really carve out and be intentional about just time that I'm dedicating to myself and my family. Like, I'm very close to my family, and so it's hard being on the road sometimes because I'm just like obsessed with my grandma, and like I love just like being at home and being in my bed and just like chilling.
Yeah.
So I think I've learned a lot coming out of last year where I was touring a lot, like back to back, like September, October, November. I've definitely carved out more time this year to dedicate to like writing and reading and just also being a person, being a human
Yeah.
being.
Yeah. 101 Part-Time Jobs is the name of this show. And it's about like life. I don't know if our parents' generation had such busy lives as us, as our generation. The signs for me, same thing, go to know. Because
Yeah.
we got so much, we got two lives. We're on our phone, we're in real life. We're all these different jobs. I mean, it's pretty, I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know what tell me your story, but I mean, for me and for a lot of people I know, it's hard to find a salaried job.
Yes. I was just talking about that on Twitter like a day ago because I think, some people kind of they write off being a musician as like this really easy thing, like, oh, you guys aren't actually working and your job isn't like a necessity sometimes. But I'm like, it's really hard being a musician, and it's even harder trying to like find a regular job too. Like, it's not just a thing where I can just stop being a musician and then find like a salaried position somewhere. It's kind of like getting in where you fit in. Like, where there's money, you kind of go where the money is. And I think a lot of people, I
Yeah.
mean, at least in the States, it's really hard. Like, people are going through rounds and rounds of interviews to get a job, like friends of mine, and then you still aren't getting it. And like, it's just so hard, I feel like, for everybody. But, like, touring comes with so much just nonsense and just hell sometimes. But it's also for a lot of people kind of the only definitive thing you have where you're like, okay, well, this translates into at least some money, like even if it's not a lot. But I think everyone's just kind of scrambling, like in their various industries, is my kind of understanding of it.
Yeah. I mean, touring being something that you could put like, say, and this is a very new thing for me, is like looking at a profit and loss sheet, right? How much money you're making, how much money's going out. As an artist, I feel like this to be a successful artist today, you have to be on top of that. You have to know exactly what's going on. You got to be smarter than the record labels. You got to be as smart as your manager. You're not just playing music or like, and writing songs is fucking hard. But to have the numbers in there and like to do the accounting, you're an accountant if you're an artist.
Yeah, I always say you're like the employee and you're the employer and you're like the manager like of the whole operation. Like, and you're the CEO. Like, it's like you're doing so many things. Like, I feel like these days, kind of like you were saying, we're so involved with the phone. Like, you also, as an artist now, I feel like a lot of my peers and I complain about how like it's not, you aren't just making music anymore. Like, you're also a content creator, and like you're on social media, you have to like market yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are so many skills that are not just like, you don't think that really is like what just being a musician is, but it's like you're really being like a marketing
For
person
sure.
and like communications, like doing all that stuff. So it is a lot, and I think that I, in my short time, really kind of learning some of these things, I have so much respect for people who have done it for decades. Like I can't even, sometimes some days I can't even imagine kind of being in that cycle for so long.
Things change so quickly.
And it has changed, like talking to people who are older, like the TikTok stuff, and it's just a completely different animal. And I feel like because things change so much, like streaming at one point was a new change for people, and you have to be so adaptable. You have to learn so many new things and new software and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It's like that's like your own. It's its own separate education itself.
For someone like you, where things change and like festivals get cancelled, dates get moved, release dates get moved, how do you try and stay on top of that? Do you communicate with friends and family? Are you super open about it and ask for people's advice? How do you deal with that feeling of trying to stay across it?
Yeah, I've really had to lean on my support system, like my family, and you know, I have I'm lucky to come from an art scene like out of Chicago where I feel like people are really close knit and we really support one another. So it is a matter of asking a lot of questions and asking people like, what was your experience like, or even being transparent, about like, what did you get paid for this? Like I think especially amongst like women in this industry, being aware of like the disparity. There's so much pay disparity. So like being honest with each other, like, oh, this, I remember one of my friends was playing a festival and she got paid a completely different amount as like our other friend who's a man, and he was like, wait, like just so you guys know, I got paid this. And like,
And they were on like a level, sort of level billing.
yeah, like on the same level, and I think
Wow.
being able to have that type of community is really important in an industry where people are really, secretive, and they kind of gatekeep things,
Yeah.
and people aren't transparent all the time. So finding people who are willing to be transparent becomes a sport, and knowing who to trust is like everything. And I'm the type of person where I was raised by parents who are very like protective, and they don't really trust anybody. Like they've never, even like with babysitters and stuff, like my mom was like, I don't trust anyone to watch my kids. And so like I think I've really adopted their kind of skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps me because a lot of people, the bright eye, the opportunities, everything looks so attractive in these packages, but then you open it up and it's like a bag of chips, and you think the amount of chips that are in the bag is so much, but it's really just half air. So you kind of have to be a little cynical, in my
Yeah.
opinion, to get through.
Yeah, for real. What would you love to do? I mean, with this record getting great reviews and you're touring and you're coming back to the UK, there's that kind of mix of skepticism, like you say, but also that, you're in the opportunity now to springboard, kind of get to the next step or whatever that means. Do something, do the next thing, take the next big step forward and find out where that foot lands.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely daunting and exciting. I feel like your debut album is such a weird thing because you only have one time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's kind of like you also have, you only have to get that over with once.
Mm-hmm.
Like once you do the debut, it's like, all right, I did that. And I think there's such a variety of feelings that are attached to like the sophomore album, and what's
Mm-hmm.
next and stuff. But I kind of oscillate between being very scared and like very excited and just kind of experimenting and like letting the first one go and kind of being like,
Yeah.
also I kind of like to think the first one is always kind of your opportunity to be the worst. And
Mm-hmm.
like hopefully you can kind of build on that and just complicate things. And I like to just try to see the different ways I can grow. And I think also age, you naturally kind of mature and grow with time. So that album is a snapshot of one time and like one age, and then I just kind of want to see like, okay, well, what does this moment look like, and
Yeah.
how have I changed?
Yeah. I was listening to the first EP that's online anyway, A Song for Every Chamber of the Heart. And
Hmm.
it's quite interesting listening to the latest release and then going back to the first release of any artist. I often find that, like, even though the first release might be different production wise, or, you know, definitely like maybe limited for most people, I think you always get a little bit of the gold nuggets. You know, you get the way that your songs, the way that on the album, it's really kind of stripping back the heart and holding it out in front of you and being so open. It's like having a conversation with your best friend. That's what your songs feel like to me. And it was there in the EP, the first one that's online anyway.
Hmm.
So it's interesting that, you know, with a first record, there are always going to be the moments of who you truly are,
Yeah.
and that will always be there.
Yeah, and like the grit and too, like I feel like, there's so many opportunities to polish stuff as you get like you move forward, but I think I love debut albums. I think you're right. Like they show you so much of the skeleton and the foundation of who someone is or like where they started. I just love just in general, I think a lot about lineages. I think about my own lineage and my family, but also like my artistic lineage, like who do I come from? And I love listening to my favorite artists, their debut albums, because I think it's just such a snapshot and like where people start and where they begin. Like the origin says so much. Even if their latest
Mm-hmm.
project is something completely different, that origin story, it tells you so much about their roots and where they come from and where their feet were kind of first planted before they embarked on the rest of their journey. So I love a debut album.
Yeah. I think it's the time between records is always interesting, because say if you've got record number 3 and, like, you know, as a fan you're really into it, and then album number 4 is different, but you don't know what that person's you don't know what that person's been through or what's happened to them. You don't know what books they've read. You don't know what relationships or things that have changed their lives. It's funny because as listeners we feel like we know the artist so well.
Yeah, it's true. It's a lot of, especially in the days, this age of the internet, like people really, they have their parasocial attachments. And so you see it so often where
Yeah.
someone departs from, their previous sound or something and people feel so betrayed. But it's like, how is
Mm.
it a betrayal to you, when it's like this is this person's individuality and they're really staying true to themselves and they're following like what they need themselves, but we become so attached to these people who we don't know, but we just
Uh,
love their music, and so you kind of set up your
yeah.
own expectations. But I try to just kind of accept whatever my favorite artists want to offer, because you never know. I mean, I grew up on jazz, so I grew up on like Miles Davis, and he had so many eras. And some were really weird,
Mm-hmm.
some were not good, but like,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of gotta let the people have their process too. That's what art is.
101, 101, part-time jobs. 101, 101, 101, part-time jobs. Have you got a setup at home? How do you demo?
So on the first album, I had like a pretty, I guess, janky setup. I really just had like a mic and like an interface, and I was just singing, literally like sitting on my bed, like just recording
Mm-hmm.
with like a pretty
Mm-hmm.
basic mic, like, and I think over time I've gotten more help from people and have kind of developed more of like an actual setup, and just it's still pretty simple. Like I like to start with, just when I write songs, I like to just write myself and kind of just figure out stuff on the guitar or just like record a melody or something. And for the
Mm-hmm.
album, we kind of just did that approach. Like I made the whole album myself, just like with the guitar and my voice, and I just kind of arranged basically using my guitar and like also its limitations to kind of just create like what I could make. Like I didn't have all the instruments or whatever, but I just had me and my guitar, so I kind of had to like use that as a conduit for
Mm-hmm.
like what I was trying to express, and then that gave us like the skeleton to like go back in and do all the instrumentation. So I kind of like to work like that. I liked it to be like really stripped down. Like it's kind of like, oh, if you had like a pot and a pan, like what could you make with just those two things? Like you don't have an
Yeah.
orchestra with you, so like you have to be the orchestra. And then once I kind of let myself be limited in that way, it allows me to kind of just get to like the grit and just kind of express stuff in its really distilled form. And then I can go
Mm-hmm.
back and kind of beef stuff up and, we're always joking like, oh, we're just giving these songs like a BBL. It's like you just take some instrumentation and kind of complicate things and add things. But the foundation is really always just like me and my guitar, really.
That's awesome. I had no idea that the album is self-produced.
I produced it with my friends, but the beginning of it, like I wrote all the songs and like thought of up the melodies just kind of myself. And then we
Mm-hmm.
recorded my guitar and just my vocal and then used that as like the foundation for going back and adding like strings and stuff like that. So that part my friends helped me
Yeah.
with. Like those are my co-producers because a lot of people I think ask about like the music like, "Oh, did you like write all the lyrics and stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was kind of like all in my bedroom. It was like 2021, no one was leaving the house like so that was like all me, just like my guitar. Like the original demos are so funny because it just kind of sounds like just the funniest kind of like stripped down versions of all the songs the way they are now, but just like in their worst like form. But yeah, it was a fun process.
Yeah. Do you self-edit much? I was just listening. There's an Irish songwriter called CMAT,
Hmm.
that is awesome, and she was talking about how she loves. There's this editor, a writer that she likes, and part of the reason that she likes it so much is because he doesn't really self-edit. He doesn't kind of go back and make things more rounded or give it more shape. Do you think you self-edit?
um I feel like maybe in a sense, like I think lyrically I'm very picky about my lyrics, so I sometimes I'll have different like iterations of lyrics. Like I'll go back and be like, that's not the right word, or I'll
Mm-hmm.
change stuff like that. But I believe in editing. I think partially probably because of my background in poetry, I think that editing is like everything. I feel like you need to have like an editing process in some form. It's probably not as intense as like if you were writing a book, but even just going
Mm.
back and like, okay, is this really the best like string sound for this, or like do we want it to sound this way? Like we had some slide on the album that originally was kind of like really bootleg, like we just kind of made our own sound, like slide sound, but then we went back and like actually got someone to play slides, so like stuff like that where I think like
Nice. Yeah.
making those little choices that can just take stuff to like the next level.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like believe in doing that, but some stuff like if it's not broken, like don't fix it. Like the label, like they would have feedback, and there were some things that we were like, nope, like this is not changing.
101.
So you grew up in the Chicago area.
Hmm.
What was it like growing up there? What were people doing coming out of school? Were people going to university or college? Or were people getting jobs at 16? What was going on around you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb, and it was pretty standard to do the traditional route of graduating and going to college and stuff. I took a gap year right out of high school because I was the youth poet laureate of Chicago, so I stayed at home and like did that for a year. And I think actually,
You were the youth poet laureate.
yeah, of Chicago. And then I went on to be like the national youth poet laureate when I was in school, but I took the year
What?
off. Yeah, it's like one of the things that I don't really mention that much, but it always comes up because it's like out there. but I did that.
That's awesome.
And it was really interesting, you know. So I think gap years were becoming like more popular like during my time in school. Like people were taking a year off, and then of course like when COVID hit, like people were taking a year off out of college and stuff. But I feel like a lot of my friends who are musicians didn't go to college, but like some did. My parents were like, "You have to go." So I
Hmm.
kind of just knew I was gonna have to get a degree in something. But they've always supported
Yeah.
me doing music, but they always just wanted me to have a degree. It's like always been a big thing in my family. So I just got it done. I got it over with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being the Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, you were the third U.S. National Youth Poet Laureate from 2019 to 2020. Do you get paid for that? Do you get funding for that?
You get paid for gigs, but it's not like you're a paid position.
Yeah.
Like you don't get like a specific like honorarium just for being the laureate. But I did do a lot of like gigs and stuff.
Great. Did that kind of put your mind into I could be a poet, a gig poet? I could make a career out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started doing poetry and I first joined my spoken word club, like as a teenager, it was really a weird process for me because before that moment, I had never met like a living poet who was like, I'm a poet for a living. I just
Hmm.
didn't like, you read like Edgar Allan Poe or like, somebody like that, like Walt Whitman, and you're like, okay, this is cool, but these are like dead guys, like,
Yeah.
but like meeting someone like Patricia Smith or like, seeing just like any contemporary poet to see them at work and to understand like, oh, that's their job. Like they are a poet as a living was such a like mind-boggling thing for me as a teenager because I had never seen that. And so when I got really into poetry and I started like working at Young Chicago Authors, this organization in Chicago, that was like one of my first artistic jobs was like working as a poet and doing workshops and like performing as a poet. And there's such a crazy thing because I had never really known that that could be a job. Like I knew I wanted to be a musician and I could see examples of musicians, throughout history and around me, but it was an interesting type of like position because I never really like as a kid you probably couldn't have convinced me that that would have been like a conceivable thing that I would have been
Hmm.
doing. So
Hmm. Did it give you confidence?
yeah, I think in general what poetry has done for me and especially like through the education of just like my mentors, like even though I don't do slam poetry anymore, I think that it taught me so much about like stage presence
Hmm.
and conviction and like how to say things in a certain way, and like we had to memorize poems and like run through them and do like movements and stuff also as a part of our performances. So it was as much as an education and performance as it was like in the literary aspect of stuff.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, do you think that going back, a few years, could you plot a time where you thought, okay, I want to start singing. I want to start playing more than I want to be a poet. Was there like an awkward shift for you in that?
um I feel like I had to kind of like take back the reins like when I became like the poet laureate and I kind of became like associated with poetry only. It was a weird thing because I've always made music. Like even before I wrote poetry, I've always liked to sing, and I grew up around my brother playing the piano and the trombone and stuff, and so we'd make songs together and stuff. So that was like what I started doing first. But the narrative kind of became like, oh, she's a poet because I had had this national position, and so people like saw me as that. So when I was working on my
Hmm.
album and just doing that stuff, I feel like I kind of had to like reintroduce myself in a lot of ways and kind of like take back the narrative a little bit and be
Yeah.
like, wait, I'm still a musician. That's why I wasn't really
Yeah.
anticipating people to like listen to the album because I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if people really believe they don't really see that side of me. Like a lot of people kind of associate me as a poet, but people who grew up with me or like who saw me in the Chicago scene there's a lot of entanglement between poetry and music in Chicago. Like at open mics, it's normal to see someone get up and do a song, and then the person after them does a poem. And like most rappers that you know, like Chance the Rapper and No Name Saba, like most of us came through Young Chicago Authors in some capacity, or like participated in poetry slams, did stuff alongside poets. So there's this kind of idea of, everyone was just kind of welcome to do their own thing. So when I was in that environment, it was common for me. Sometimes I'd do a poem, sometimes I'd like sing a song. And my
Yeah.
peers knew that for me, but trying to kind of get that to the world, I didn't really know if I was going to be allowed to kind of have that duality, because I think people like to pigeonhole artists a lot, but
Yeah.
I kind of had to just put myself out there.
People find it hard to think of you as just one thing or more than one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Growing up in Chicago, what bands were you really keen on? I was into Fall Out Boy as a young teenager, but that's going back 15 years now. And like that was kind of my Chicago reference,
Yeah.
and Alkaline Trio as well.
Hmm.
So more like the kind of pop punk stuff, really. But what was your Chicago jam?
Yeah, so I grew up on a lot of, well, I was kind of always like a music nerd growing up, and I loved, like, my parents are in their 60s, so I grew up with a lot of like older music. Like my dad
Hmm.
is a big jazz person, and my mom loves soul. Like I grew up on like Aretha Franklin and just all the classics and stuff. But growing up, like some of the bands that I discovered on my own, I was obsessed with like classic rock bands. Like I loved like the Beatles, and I was obsessed with the Who and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But I also really loved like the Arctic Monkeys. Like I to this day I love Alex Turner as a songwriter. And that was probably like one of my biggest influences growing up. And then like locally, we just had so many talented rappers. Like I grew up like in the moment of like the rise of Chance the Rapper, and like No Names was one of my biggest influences growing up. And people even like seeing like Chief Keef as a teenager and like his rise to fame, like growing up with that, I just thought that there was so much possibility. And growing up with like the SoundCloud era of music, people were just kind of organically putting out their own stuff, and it was free, and people just wanted to put out music. And that's kind of the
Hmm.
environment I grew up in. Everyone kind of, I always knew I wanted to do folk stuff because I have always been the most like attracted to folk music. I grew up with like Joan Baez and Jim Croce and like Joni Mitchell and stuff, but for a while I would kind of camouflage as like more R&B slash like, I also had a kind of a small like rap era myself that I, kind of bury, but I definitely did that for a
Sick.
while, and I was in like jazz, like vocal jazz as a teen, so I did a lot of that stuff. So I was kind of doing things everywhere, but when I would make music myself, it was always me and my guitar. So I've always had this like very like classic folk kind of process,
Hmm.
but I think I was just scared that I wasn't going to be able to like, you know, get the support that I wanted just like making folk music. Like I was so impressed by all these like really cool rappers, and I was like, oh, maybe I can be like SZA or something. But I like knew that I just like to sing and play
Hmm.
my guitar, and so when I started doing it, I was really held up and supported by my community to like just be myself, and that really helped me get the confidence to just kind of make the music that I wanted to make.
Yeah, great to hear. I think there's something magical about making your own space for something, like a space that didn't exist in the same way before you were there.
Hmm.
To make that happen and be like, yeah, I think that would be cool if that happened, and do it. I think that's such an amazing, special thing.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Even just the dream of, oh, I want to be a musician. Like it's weird to be on tour because I feel like I can just think back to being like 15 and being in my room, like putting on a performance in front of like my stuffed animal or something. And then like just
Yeah.
it's in your head. It's so weird when stuff that's just been in your head for so long, you like look up and that's your reality to an extent. Like it's
Yeah.
very crazy.
Yeah. Hey, Kara, thank you so much for talking to me. it's
Yeah.
awesome to hear your story and where you're coming from, because 101 part-time jobs, it's about, you know, the jobs that people do, but it's about like the job of life, you know what I mean, of waking up every day and getting out of bed and trying.
Yeah.
I think this is it's a conversation about trying.
Yeah, totally. Thank you also for your questions.
Of course. What on the jobs thing, what was the most difficult part-time job you've had? Have you had any short-lived retail, restaurant style jobs?
I've luckily been able to avoid retail, and I have so much sympathy for people who work in restaurants. I've never worked in a restaurant. I feel like the worst job I've had, I don't know. I had to work at my school. I did a desk job, and I had to like answer the phone and like be a secretary. And that was kind of not the most fun thing I've ever had to do. I feel like that was pretty boring.
You had to be an actor a little bit.
Yeah, I had to like make sure I, transferred people to the right call and like cleaning up the space and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like that's probably like the most mundane job. Other than that, I like watch people's kids a lot. Like I babysat a lot, and
You're
that was actually
responsible.
fun. I love kids, so I've always liked to babysit. But
Nice.
yeah.
So that was Kara Jackson here on 101 Part-Time Jobs. Good chat. I really enjoyed that. Speaking to poets today, I don't know, maybe it's the way that I grew up and the people I was surrounded by, but becoming a poet isn't an obvious thing to do. So putting your effort and your time into that is a really special thing. I think that's awesome. Kara's record, Why Does the Earth Give Us People to Love, is still out. It's a brilliant record. I recommend going streaming and buying that. And cheers for being here. Thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe if you're able to. And we'll be back next week with Hockey Dad, the band from Australia. We're able to continue doing this and have a small team thanks to our sponsors, one of which is DistroKid. DistroKid's the best solution for you to put out your own records. It's an affordable yearly fee. You earn 100% of your own royalties, and you can get 30% off your first year at DistroKid by heading to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod.
101 Part-Time Jobs is hosted by Giles Bidder and produced by me, Olivia Swash. This has been a Mighty Moon Media production.